CEO for this organization, Lead for Taiwan. And today we have our representative of IYLP from different countries. Let me have a quick introductions for our IYLP. We have participants from United States, and Lynette from Philippines and Malaysia and New Zealand and some other country. Yep. So now let us welcome Alan. Welcome. And Alan, let me stop share my screen and you can share by yourself right now. Welcome, Alan, once again.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I mean, good morning, good evening, everyone. And it's great to see you all like at such timing. And it'd be great if you can turn on your webcam like as possible as you may, so that I can have a, I guess, more vivid introduction and interaction with you. Because obviously it's better if I'm interacting with people with, you know, like visuals rather than just blanks. Just if you may, that would do me a great deal of work. So, and again, good morning. Like, it's good to see everyone. Like, I've read a few intros of your background, and it's really exciting for me to, I guess, share more of a personal journey with you. And I have a slide deck prepped. It's not very exquisite, but I think it's great if I can share essentially what personally I'm doing in Taiwan and how this may spark as a example or inspiration for you to see how education can be a important force in boosting and developing the overall future, I would say, change maker and action taker. So let me just share my slides and I shall begin. So, voila. Can you see my screen at the moment?
Yes.
Great. So I'll just give a quick introduction of myself so you can know my background better. So now I'm working full-time at Lead for Taiwan. It's a nonprofit organization that is working very hard to strive for equitable access to critical thinking education here in Taiwan. And personally, I mean, my name is Alan. And prior to committing to Lead for Taiwan at the moment, I was studying history and economics at New York University. And prior to that, I was studying at the United World College in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But usually, yeah, I would prefer introducing myself with, you know, I guess photos, like a few sets of photos of myself. Like I mean, I'm personally enjoy music now, like more into orchestra, like classical music, but I also enjoy sport a lot. I used to enjoy surfing, tennis, and so on. I served in Taiwan's army before, and these were like pictures of my studies and pictures of me teaching. And I was very into like poker tournaments. Like, it's a very mathematical and the decision making passion, I would say. And yeah, the photo here is quite interesting. Was meeting Ban Ki-moon in a forum in Europe when I was still back in school. And yeah, that's pretty much myself. And as we don't have like that much time today, I wouldn't ask you for introduction. Otherwise, I usually would do that. But Sean has sent me your bio already, so I kind of have an overview of who you are. And just a quick intro of today's agenda. There are a few things I want to share with you, right? Like I'll start from my upbringing, which plays a very important role in terms of the context of what Lead for Taiwan is doing and what we try to, I guess, provide for Taiwanese students. Then I'll share what Lead for Taiwan does with its vision, model, and status quo. Then I'll bring up a few, I guess, two main difficulties and challenges in the educational field for both startups or any educational workers, so that if you are into, I guess, the field, you will take some notes and perhaps it'll be of great help. Then we can do a QA session. And I guess that like one rule, I guess, would be great if you can keep in mind. It's like whenever you have questions, feel free to click the raise your hand button and break me so that I can make sure that you're all following. Right? If there's any question, no issues, you can break me. Don't worry. All right. So I'll just give a quick overview of my upbringing as to why I'm doing what I'm doing. So the first question I have, and keep it as engaging as possible. I want to first understand, what do you think is the most important issue or problem in your educational system? It can be anything. It can be the lack of resources. It can be the lack of proper curriculum. It can be like a lack of academic freedom or anything. Be great if you can share some insights so I can also pace myself and kind of cater the content to you if possible. So please take 1 minute or 30 seconds to think about this issue. I'm sure everyone is intrigued by educational problems to some extent. So I'm doing a timer for 30 seconds and I'll call upon you to provide insights. Thank you, Linus. Can you elaborate a little bit more? What specific resources are you referring to? Let it be teachers, actual materials like daily necessity or textbooks or digital platforms.
Yeah, hello, good morning. So when the
Good morning.
yeah, so when the educational system transitioned to doing things online, like they have to make do with the resources they have. They use their cell phones to access the internet so that they could attend their classes. So that made it difficult for some of the kids, especially those in the remote areas whose internet is not really that stable. So that's one thing. Yeah, it's the digital related problem.
Right. It makes sense. It makes sense. And thank you, Linus. That is definitely an urgent issue in many places, especially the rural part, right? And thank you, Alan, for noting your country of origin, because it helps me kind of contextualize the problem. And David, I think it's interesting that you mentioned it's the detachment between the academic world and the actual field industry requirement. Do you mind also sharing where you are referring to?
It's mostly
Heavy
like
focus on that.
a lot of students when they are still in school, they follow the curriculum, they take tests, and they do well. But after they graduate, they don't know what the skills they learned in school will be actually applied on their job. Like after they go into a company or an industry, they have to relearn everything they need to use in the work. And instead, like the school provides some knowledge, but they don't know how to actually apply in daily life, I guess.
Right. Thank you, David. And which country are you referring to? Taiwan?
Yeah, I'm from Taiwan. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. I see. So you see, I think it's very interesting to see like your answers. I think they're all like very critical at the moment for different people and different schools. And I think it's interesting that Alan brought up like, there's too much freedom and not enough discipline at the early stage of learning in New Zealand, right? You see, depending on the developmental stage, each country has its problem to be solved. And your answers each offer me an insight into your perspective, and I think it's important. All right. And we probably have no time for solution because it's obviously a broad and difficult topic, but I'll share what I deem to be a critical issue in Taiwan's educational field and what I propose to do and what we do actually. It's just a quick context of my background, like how I was raised during my early childhood, right? So my first 15 years, I've been very struggling to study at school. As many of you might relate, especially in Asia, it's common for schools to focus on the cramming of knowledge, right? It's a lot about knowledge acquisition, memorization. It's a competition of how much you know instead of how skillful you are, right? It's about a lot of knowledge. So I was pretty bad at it. I mean, I wouldn't say bad, but I was not happy at school because it's a lot about memorization, and I didn't understand why I had to study. That's my first 15 years. Then I guess what really clicked my head to some extent was books, right? A lot of books from outside of school. I was reading a lot just for the sake of knowing the world. I was intrigued. Like I had curiosity, right? I wanted to know what's going on in the world. So I was reading different books. And there's one book, I mean, there was two books actually that probably piqued my interest, like, or turned my childhood education. The first one was, Justice, written by Michael Sandel, a Harvard Business School professor, who's focusing a lot on the, political philosophy of ethics. And it triggered me to think about what I'm doing and why, things are right or wrong and how I face, issues in society. Then another book was called, I forgot what it's called, but it's a book pretty much sharing like the boarding school life in the US. And I was shocked by how diverse high school education could look like in the US. So that really triggered me to study abroad. I wanted to study abroad. But well, as you might imagine, it's not common and easy for a, middle class student from Taiwan to study abroad at any age. It's just really hard to afford, right? Like the finance and the cultural barriers and the language barriers, right? But I was lucky when I was 16. When I was 16, I had a chance to study abroad in Russia for 1 year. Like it opened up my world. It offered me exposure to the world. Like I was I guess lucky enough to get sponsorship from Rotary Club to study in Russia for 1 year, and that offered me again access to Europe to some extent. I was in St. Petersburg, quote unquote, the most European city in Russia, but the most Russian city in Europe. So I had a great exposure to the outside world, let's say. And then I was pretty lucky then at the age of 18, I got a scholarship to study at the United World College, which is a school that strives to promote world peace. It's a school sponsored by governments around the world and royal families or philanthropists. It has 18 campuses around the world, in the UK, in the US, in Norway, in Thailand, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in many different places, with one mission, while bringing people together and promote a sustainable future and world peace. So it opened up my world as well, more exposure and solid training in academic skills, right? And I had very interesting classmates. He also sparked me to take actions. At that time, I had a classmate from China. When he graduated from the United World College, he was 18, but he rode bike. He biked from Turkey back to China after he was done, like bicycle, literally bicycle from Turkey, kind of Europe to China. That was like 5,000 kilometers, right? And he was very smart. He tied it to the idea of Belt and Road policy in China, right? So he got many sponsorship and so on. He even convinced his Harvard interviewer to donate to his biking project. So there was a lot of exposure, a lot of cool people and cool ideas. So that opened up my world. Then I took a gap year. I began to take actions because I saw problems I wanted to solve. And I also served in the military. Then I went to NYU. Then I did more gap years and started the NGO Lead for Taiwan. So throughout my upbringings, like with this trajectory, like right, this upbringing, the biggest problem I saw myself from my perspective was the lack of critical thinking education in Taiwan, because it's a lot about memorization, a lot about knowledge acquisition. We're actually not training students on how to think, right, and how to analyze problems, right? So that's what I wanted to bring back to Taiwan, right? I was shocked by the idea of the craft of thinking skills, right? Like in both the United World College and at NYU, I was very much like, delighted and inspired by the type of, education based on dialogue. It's very skill driven. And I remember very vividly the differences. And here's a question for you, right? This is a question I asked many Taiwanese students, more than hundreds, I would say so far. And 90% of students can answer this correctly. So it's for you. If you know the answer, please type in the chat. When did the Western Roman Empire collapse? If you have knowledge on this, please type in the chat. If not, I'm somewhat glad for you, because I don't think it's a question you necessarily need to know. Right. Huggy gets it right. 476 common era, right? Like that's the answer. You are right. So you see, like I think Peggy is somewhat the more mature and experienced student of this class, right? And you see, she still remembers it. What for? So what? But this exactly is the focus of Taiwan's education, specifically in humanity, right, and language. But what for, right? What can we do with this? What struck me really was like this idea of craft of thinking skills, right? This is my high school history teacher from the United World College. The first day in the class here told us that schools should provide students with skills they can use in life. And you might be wondering what skills we're talking about. Here's some takeaway from both McKinsey and OECD, right? They both put critical thinking as the very top, very important skills needed for this generation, right? So I would say critical thinking, to answer my own question, was the, I guess, most important issue I saw and I still see in Taiwan's educational system. And I wanted to contribute to that. That's how I began. That's the context of what Lead for Taiwan was doing, okay? So yeah, I want to bring back the critical thinking education to everyone, right? With the status quo in Taiwan, or the history, critical thinking education had been very much of a privilege, right? Only very resourceful students can have access to it, right? Like it can be private schools, private international schools, mostly, where they have to write a lot in terms of essays or, in debate. But they are both essentially very privileged activities to firstly begin, right? So that's what I want to do. And that's what back in 2018, right when I graduated from United World College, I gathered a few friends and started a critical thinking seminar at Jianzhong, like the quote unquote best male high school in Taiwan, because they were kind of welcoming to it, right? There's a trend and need for this. And then after that, I realized the problem, right? Such seminar is not sustainable, it's unsustainable, right? Because differing from, all this like knowledge acquisition learning, critical thinking requires a very intensive engagement, right, between students and the discussion leader or the teacher, let's say the lecturer, right? It's hard to scale up. You need a lot of people to be doing this. What would you do if you were in my shoes? What would you do, right? In order to teach, let's say, many students critical thinking, you need a lot of teachers, instructors, right? But the fundamental issue of the problem here we are talking about is that the system lacks critical thinking. Then how do we even begin? What do you guys think? Let's set a 30 seconds timer again, I guess. Think about this. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Let's say you have a idea of what you want to do in terms of the materials, curriculum, but you have no one else to teach with you. What can you do? I might be able to teach I don't know, 20 students, but what then? How can it be scaled up? How can it be scaled up? Train the trainer, right? Sean knows it. He's an expert of the NGOs in Taiwan, so he should know it, right? Connect school, principals, teachers, collaboration. You're all correct, right? You're all correct. And from my standpoint of view, what I make the training institutionalized, very important. Institutionalization is an important word, correct? Right, correct. You're all right. So essentially, all we approach was the trainer model, right? Essentially, train people who can teach the critical thinking, right? Then in that way, you can spread. So essentially, what Lead for Taiwan does, we first find inspirational people, right? How we approach this was that, we talk to students who took part in our seminars, in the critical thinking seminars, and be like, hey, if you want to do this, if you are interested in making a change or impact to Taiwan's educational system, right? Would you want to join the team, right? You first need people, right? Often we forget that besides a good idea, you need good people and trustworthy people and people who you can share the mission, empathy, and vision with to start off, right? So the first thing is, we look for people in our friend group and critical thinking seminars we were organizing, right? Because those people who take part in similar activities as you tend to have similar vision or passion with you, right? So in that case, that's how we begin, right? So what we did was that, I gathered my friends from Cambridge, from abroad, to design courses, right? Because we need to have a standardized or institutionalized critical thinking material to begin with, right? So, we spend a lot of time discussing, designing. Finally, we come to a curriculum, right? Then what we needed was a training program that catered to this course, right? This material, this curriculum, right? We need people who can teach this curriculum. So we need to have a training program for people to know how to teach this curriculum. And that's also where we spend a lot of time, working with, university professors or with students to figure out how to achieve this. Then we train an instructor based on the training program, right? We're talking about, this was the photo from our previous cohort. Each semester, we train about 20 critical thinking instructors for a whole semester for 5 months. Then we would have a kind of a presentation day for them to demonstrate their skill as a critical thinking instructor. Then we send them to local high schools to teach critical thinking during school hours, right? Not like an after-school program. It can be an after-school program, but we try our best to negotiate with schools to place the critical thinking program during the school hours so that students can have access to it without needing the extracurricular activities. And in the past 1.5 years, we have achieved a few things. We have a pretty solid instructors training program, right? Which includes more than 12 workshops. We have 2 sets of critical thinking curriculums now. One on the path of sustainable issues. We use issues to train people's analytical skills, argumentative skill, and so on. It can be about like carbon tax, it can be about sugar tax, this sort, right? The other curriculum, which we focus a lot on logic training. So like, how you apply inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, and in analyzing problems, in evaluating status quo, and so on. So we have 2 sets of critical thinking curriculums. We have trained more than 60 college student instructors, and we have partnered with more than 20 local schools. And we've accumulated to about 800 teaching hours so far, and more than about 1,500 local students have taken part in our programs at local schools, right? And this will grow supposedly in the following, months, semesters, and years. This can be scaled up, and we are now trying very hard to reach schools in the South. From this semester, there will be, I think, 4 schools from the South that we'll reach out to, meaning that we'll have our trained instructors teaching on a regular basis there. And we are trying our best to reach to more rural places to have, impact further there. So that's what we are doing now with Lead for Taiwan. That's our mission here, right? We want to provide equitable access to critical thinking education, as it's said, right, by OECD and McKinsey, to be one of the top most needed skills in this era, and it's believed, by many and me as well, to be lacking in Taiwan. So then, throughout the past years, what I guess we have identified in terms of top challenges in the educational field, obviously you can think of is funding, right? But I would say the reason why funding is a huge issue in education compared to other industries is that it has a very complex stakeholders. The relationship between stakeholders is very complex in education. How so? Take a look at this diagram. This diagram lists a few parties involved in education. Think about this. In other sectors, let's say in business sectors, the main issue comes with what? The supplier, the buyer, and the government, right? Or a platform, right? 4 stakeholders. That's what it usually look like. You have a company that provides a service or a product, right? Then you have buyer, right? Those who need the product or the service. Then the government might regulate, business to some extent, and perhaps there's a platform to facilitate the business, the company, to sell its product or to provide service, right? So the buyer will pay for the service or product it gets from the business, from the company, right? But for education, it's very complex, right? Those who pay for the service and those who undergo or who accept, who take education, and those who evaluate, who approve it, are all different, right? A student is the main subject, main party that accepts, that takes the service of education, right? So education, that process of education to a large extent comes from the teachers, right? But then the government has a say in what curriculum, what things teacher can teach, right? And then it's also restricted by school advisory, which includes principals, right? Or the committee of the school, right? The management committee. And then not only students, the person who receives education has a say in what he learns, Parents also have their perspective, right? They will intervene if they deem something is bad or like unsuitable for the student, even though students might like it or not, right? Then there will be the local community or businesses that are involved. So in a nutshell, I mean, today our goal is not to dig into these complex stakeholder relationships, but is to have you understand the fact that education is a very difficult topic because it has very complex stakeholders, right? You need to satisfy different people, right? For us, right, we need to have a curriculum that will be helpful for students, right? Students need to like it. We need to make sure our instructors can engage with students, right? But we also need to convince the school. It can be, like the school advisory principal or a particular person in the management committee. We need to convince them that our program is good for their students, right? But then we also need to follow the government's regulation, right? Or we also need to, like satisfy teachers, or else they might protest. They might be like, why is our student taking part in this extra courses instead of more math or more sciences class, right? And we might also be competing against some businesses, right, who are trying to profit from critical thinking education, right? And then the big issue, as you were saying, as Kelly was saying, funding, right? Usually schools wouldn't have that much budget, right? Taiwan schools are usually not that resourceful, and governments might not have budget for it. So we have to see them, wow, like we provide service to the school, but the school wouldn't be the one that can afford the service. So we need to think of where else we can get, like resources for this service, right? That's why the educational field is very complex, because its stakeholders relationship is very messy as compared to other industries that are not necessarily simple, but rather straightforward, right? So in this regard, for Live for Taiwan, I can share with you, we have 4 main source of income to sustain our operation. I mean, we have 4 full-time staff now and 5 perhaps part-time staff and some volunteers. So we need to have corporate sponsorship. We need to convince corporates to sponsor us, to pour money and resources into our operation for not necessarily direct benefits of the corporate, which is very difficult, right? Because for companies, their decision making are mostly based on profits, right? How much profit they can generate for their resources. But to sponsor us, to endorse what we do, corporates do not get direct profits. But for Live for Taiwan now, we are sponsored by Cathay Bank, which is one of the largest local bank in Taiwan. What they care about, I guess, is the promotion and advocate of sustainable issues like carbon issues. So they put faith and sponsorship in us for that, right? Then we also take part in social innovation competition awards to gain funding for our operation. And schools, although have limited budgets, they do have some budget still. That's also part of our revenue stream. Then what we are working pretty hard on right now is public donation. Up until this day, we haven't begun our public donation programs because we had no human capacity to deal with this, but now we are working on it. We had placed more of our effort on the actual service itself, which is education, right? Actually teaching the student, right? I guess it's easier to convince people to donate to you after you have achieved certain degrees of, I guess, results. So that's what Live for Taiwan does for its funding. The interesting thing about the educational field is that it varies very much from entities, organizations to organizations. You might be lucky and find just one very wealthy and generous philanthropist, and he or she or they might just sponsor whatever you do, but it's not easy, right? So every educational NGOs or organization has different business model, and it's not necessarily something you can directly copy from, unless unlike certain businesses. But that's the interesting thing about it, right? Depending on the service, the products you provide, you need to have different revenue stream. And this is what Live for Taiwan does. So you can take that as a reference and think of what perhaps education in your community, in your country, might do with such a concept. Voila, I guess that's pretty much it for what I would like to share. And if you have any questions and ideas you'd like to discuss, I'm happy to engage and try my best to offer ideas. They may not be always correct, but it's what I can offer.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan, for the sharing regarding the Lit for Taiwan's NPO that working to educate our next generations. Is there any questions from the floor to interact with our speakers regarding education's issue? Any questions that regarding issue educations or critical thinking will be fine? Any questions from the floor? Alan is like, we actually worked with Alan a few years ago to train the youngster, and then along the training program, I can see there's quite an interactive process, and then we actually needs a lot of skills to interact with the youngster right now to make them think more and then be more critical thinking, because they are full of false informations right now in the world. Okay, we have first questions from David. Do we need that many critical thinkers in the real world now? Questions from David, the first questions. So what do you think, Alan?
Right, that's always a good question, right? Like in France, their system, like is said to be quite critical thinking driven, right? But then people argue so much, and even during the Yellow Vest protest in France, President Macron organized a grand debate in the country to talk about these issues. I think there's a difference between like critical thinking and necessarily arguing. I would say the importance of critical thinking is for Taiwan, let's say, the economy to upgrade, right? Instead of producing, let's say, chips or certain products for Western companies. If Taiwan wants to upgrade its economy, we need people who can like better analyze problems and to create things, right? Not only for the business field, but for the public sector or non-profit sectors, right? We need more people who can analyze the system, oversee the system, and take actions, right? If everyone is like only learning, acquiring knowledge, right, that's very passive, right? And I guess that's also why for OECD, which is in charge of, let's say, the PISA assessment, like it's a like a governmental think tank for the developed world, they place critical thinking as one of the priorities in terms of education or skills for 2030. Because now there are so many problems, so many issues in our society, right? Not only education. How the government can deal with it, relies on the skills of the next generation, right? So I guess that's why we need more critical thinkers, let's say. And Alan says, what actions taken to make the program sustainable? Any further work for students to take part? I really think like the first thing is really to have a group of people who share ideas with you, because in order to carry on something further, you need a team, and that's actually the biggest realization for me during the process of starting Live for Taiwan, because you need people to help in many regards, right? You can see my slide deck today is terrible because one of my colleagues who's in charge of beautification of things is not here, so I couldn't ask her for help. I mean, it's a very bare minimum of what teamwork means, but to make any program and any organization sustainable, it requires people, and people need to spend great effort on that. And Davey says, when it costs more different ideas and harder to unite the thoughts. Well, what does it mean to unite the thoughts, right? Like in countries with authoritarian regimes, to have unified thoughts, is that something we are striving? I doubt it, right? I would say, a very interesting thing about, let's say, the Western development in Europe, let's say in the Enlightenment periods, right? The time, I mean, obviously on top of colonization, which is bad part of the Enlightenment, right? Many ideas about modern science, natural science, or so-called reasoning came from the idea of, critical thinking, right? People had different thoughts and there were debates, engagement based on rationality. And that's what pushed for the shift of paradigm in Europe, right, in history. So I would say different, like diversity, different ideas might bring better solutions at the same time, right? Linus says, considering the challenges, did you have any point between starting and stability when you feel you want to give up? Well, yeah, for sure. I definitely had time and I almost gave up and be like, I can, work corporates or so on. But once we began to have students, that process is really rewarding, right? I can say personally, because I still teach, right? Teaching is really one of the most fulfilling job you can think of, right? Directly engaging with students and see their progress. Of course, you need to get good programs, right? We are always optimizing and learning to make our programs better. And that is directly reflected on your engagement with the students, right? So I would say really that's something I guess I need. I need passion. I want impact. I don't want to, sit in the office making decks 5 hours a day, right? I want to actually, learn to teach and to provide programs that can help people, right? That can enlighten and inspire people. So again, I think how I deal with this, obviously impact, goal, passion is one thing, but the other is people around you. If you have a good team, right? If you can cheer up each other's, you can share the ups and downs. That's what matters, and that's what will carry you further, right? Obviously, it's a cliche to say teamwork is important and so on, but I guess it's really that emotional bond, right? That makes you want to do things, right? You want to do things with a group of people, with certain groups of people, right? That's what distinguishes, I guess, NGOs to a large extent from corporates, and that's what makes me, energetic and inspired to work further. And how to make 1 to 100 that get, I think, Peggy, that is a very interesting question, right? I guess it's really about passion. Like, I think one thing I realized this time, this summer, I was back in Europe to meet some friends and so on. What, it sounds like self-bragging, but it's really not. I was doing a self-reflecting session with a friend. We always do that to reflect on our, bad faith, according to Sartre. It's a philosophical idea, or bad characteristics or good characteristics that make us who we are today. And one thing my friends mentioned about me, I didn't notice, was that I genuinely hope people around me to do well. I don't think I have a lot of jealousy, or of course I get jealous with certain things, but I genuinely want people around me to do well. I want their life to go well. For our staff, I want them to have a good life, right? We are working very hard to increase their pay, to show them that, it's a equitable choice to work in NGOs. It's a career choice, right? So I think that's one thing to genuinely, believe in what you do and have good faith in people around you. I guess that can inspire people to some extent, right? Then share some. So I would say, like, feedback from the students. I love that. Look, we do surveys. That's when numbers become important, right? We also need to convince the corporate to sponsor us. So I believe it's around 99.2% of students who had taken part in the program at school say that they believe schools need this, right? I would say the most common feedback from students is that, wow, they never knew that, critical thinking, like a class like this can be so engaging. And in the process, it's like experiential learning, right? You engage in the conversation, you get ideas. The instructor kind of guides you through, how to portray or demonstrate your arguments. And in that process, it's a craft of thinking, right? Because that's very different from what Taiwanese students have been used to, right? Passively receiving information, right? That's important. And that's also what struck me a lot when I was in Europe. So I would say that's feedback. And is it okay to ask, of course, it's hard to say, right, you see the impact. So I guess it's about whether schools accept it. It's about whether teachers also accept it. Our next step is to design and help teachers do workshops. We want to train the teachers as well. But that's also very hard, right? Because each teacher has their own belief, own goals, own style, right? But that's what we are working on with university professors to create, to design, and provide workshops for teachers to incorporate critical thinking elements in their teachings. So how we measure this, we don't have a very quantitative goal, methods at the moment, but you see, like, a few things we look at is the students' feedback, right? Schools feedback, and teachers. We have external advisor as well. So they'll say their comments, right? For instance, can you share with us how do your vision of the organization? I guess the vision is really to have help more schools have access to critical thinking education, right? So the reason why we approach, trainer is that, it's scalable, right? And the reason why we focus on university student at first is that they're more they're easier to shape than teachers, right? I was very young. I couldn't just go into schools and say, hey, look, I want to help you put critical thinking in your class. That is weird, right? But now, after building things up, we have more credibility. We have more experiences working with professors, teachers, and schools. Then, at this point, when times become proper, it's easier for us to say, hey, we have created a workshop for teachers. Would you like to join? Right? In that regard, it's easier. So that's our next step, right? And the goal is to have more schools, more students to have this access to critical thinking education, right? It's pretty straightforward. Then we'll also reach out to middle school. Right now, we are focusing on university and high school. Then we'll reach out to middle school and primary school. And it's quite lucky because Catholic Foundation has such services in many primary schools. So we can build this up towards that goal, right? I guess our vision is really to equip Taiwanese students with critical thinking, like the skill needed for this generation, and take actions, right? And have understanding of different sustainable issues, right? In that process to build their mental capacity and skill needed to do well in this era, right? Then I say, I'm gonna train to be the instructor. I really think, like, for me, I think the quality to become a good teacher really lies, I guess, on two. I'm not an expert, but from what I have seen, two traits. First, the ability to learn things, right? That's also what's being measured for, I guess, success for many students. For teacher, I think it's the same. How can you adapt learning? How can you always learn from details and learn new ideas? And the second thing, I think, friendliness, right? Think about this. When you were a student, were you ever really close with a student, right? An instructor, a teacher is a classroom leader, right? If you want your boss to be amicable, to be likable, right? Same thing in the classroom, right? If you cannot build personal relationship with a student, you cannot teach them because they won't properly listen to you, right? So I think friendliness is very important. The ability to build connections with students. That's also what we value a lot at our NGO and in our recruitment process for college students. We prioritize friendliness and the ability to learn. So I would say these would be the important traits to become an instructor. Great. I hope that had answered your questions, and I really appreciate the process because you have amazing questions and they are right at the point. So thank you so much for taking part. I really enjoy this process. And if there's anything I can help with, here's my contact. You can reach me through email or Facebook. If you're interested, you can check out our website or Instagram or Facebook page. So it's pretty cool. Live for Taiwan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan.
I hope
Thanks
it's
for your interesting
helpful for you
speech.
as well.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure lots of you would like to ask more questions. Due to time's constraint, if you have more questions, you can just post it in our line group or at Alan directly through the email, or search the Lit for Taiwan's organizations through Facebook or other social media. So once again, thank you so much. Thanks, Alan. Let's just give him applause. And then we have record today's sections, and if you would like to watch it again, you're welcome to watch it through YouTube. And now it's our break time.